Something that's been making news over the last few weeks is the issue of the sale of strategic Canadian assets, or the potential sale of strategic Canadian assets to state-owned enterprises, or SOEs, from authoritarian countries, given the COVID crisis. So to put that more into layman's terms, we know that many companies in Canada have seen devaluation, or a loss in the value of their company because of the COVID pandemic. So there's been a lot of news articles that have been written about, okay, well, what happens if, let's say, it's a company that owns natural resources or strategic intellectual property? Do we want that as a country? Is it in the best interest of the country to see that sale go through? Now, there's something called the Investment Canada Act, and it's this big piece of legislation, but one of its purposes is to make sure that that question, is this in the best interest of the country, is asked while, we want to make sure that the country still is a good place to do business and that investment can come in here. But there's times when that question does need to be asked. And the Investment Canada Act has a provision in there called a net benefit test. And essentially what that does is, if a company of a certain value is about to be bought by a certain type of entity, let's say an authoritarian SOE, then the government of Canada would do what's called a net benefit test to determine whether or not this is in the best interest of the country. And that's happened in the past. The problem is now is because companies have seen big devaluations, there's a question on whether or not that net benefit test would actually be triggered, because it might fall below that value threshold. So certain financial people have started to suggest, saying like, okay, well, how many of these transactions are happening with the government not looking? And what does this mean for Canadian security, Canadian, strategic interests and whatnot? So I did something that I thought I should be doing as a parliamentarian today, and that is use our parliamentary committee. I serve as the vice chair on the Standing Committee for Industry and the Shadow Minister for Industry as well, which the Industry Canada Act obviously falls under that portfolio. So I moved a motion at our committee today to study this issue, and I'll read you the motion in its entirety, and I want you to put yourself in the shoes of pretend you're a member of Parliament, pretend you're on this committee, and I propose this motion to you, okay? So I move that, given that the House of Commons last week granted the committee's power to study outside their usual scope, the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology conduct a study on the Investment Canada Act, that this study determine the extent to which companies within strategic Canadian industries have been devalued as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, the extent to which foreign buyouts may occur, determine whether the current Investment Canada Act valuation threshold is adequate to trigger a net benefit review given the potential extreme devaluation of companies within strategic Canadian industries, determine whether Canada should place a temporary moratorium on acquisitions from state-owned enterprises of authoritarian countries, and that this study consist of no less than 4 meetings, and that the study be completed by June 21st. So there's nothing really inflammatory in there whatsoever. We're just saying, like, look, parliamentarians should be studying whether or not it's in the best interest of Canadians writ large to be allowing the sale of strategic Canadian assets to state-owned enterprises, given that we're in the middle of a crisis right now. Let's look at it objectively, quantifiably. Let's get some data and let's come up with some recommendations. Like, that's what we should be doing in Parliament, right? Well, I have to thank them, my colleagues from the Bloc and the NDP that are on the committee. They voted in favor of this motion. You know who voted against this motion? The Liberals. Like, that blows my mind. Like, why wouldn't you even want to look at this issue? Like, I can get it if the wording of the motion was like completely inflammatory, but like, why wouldn't I went out of my way to make the wording neutral, because I thought, we should all be looking at this. I want to hear from the financial sector. I want to hear from national security experts. I want to hear from CEOs of these companies who may or may not have an opinion on this issue, and then come up with a recommendation. That seems pretty reasonable, but they voted against it, and I was really shocked. It's crazy. But on the positive side, because the Bloc and the NDP voted with us on this common sense motion, we were able to pass it. So my motion passed, and we will be starting this study on what I think is a really important issue. So I encourage you to follow this study as it takes place at the industry committee. For those of you who will end up watching this video on my YouTube feed later, I will post the debate on this motion because it is beyond ridiculous after I finish my clip here. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, it's, I don't know what to say. I don't know why my Liberal colleagues didn't want to study whether or not we should be selling strategic Canadian assets to authoritarian SOEs right now, given a pandemic. Anyway, it's a big development, and I wanted to come with you with a little piece of good news, which is that we got a motion to pass, and we will be studying this at industry committee. As always, working hard for you. Have a great day.